This is Harriet Grayson, your host and producer of Community Culture Showcase. And wow, we are in the midst of a nice hot summer. So to keep us refreshed, I have wonderful guests that are coming the rest of the summer. And today I have an interesting guest who's going to tell us about a long personal journey that might have impacted a lot of people in a lot of places. So I want everyone to welcome Lottie Scott. Gee, I'm messing up with the name already. Lottie Scott, who has an interesting story. And Lottie and I have a mutual friend in Norwich, Charlie Chase. And he has said that you had a great story. And so I had you as my guest on Tuesday evening in one of my literary salons, and we chatted a little bit about your book. Yes. And I wanted to have you come on here and go a little bit more in depth about what you've done, because I'm out there promoting local artists, local authors, local poets, people who have a story to tell, and they want to tell it, and I want to be the forum to help that happen. So, Lottie, wonderful, welcome here, and tell us a little bit, if you can, about what brought you to even write the book. So tell us a little bit about the writing process, and then we'll get into the story itself.
Well, I've been writing little pieces for, I would say, over 20 years.
Okay.
And so the writing just evolved. And first part that I start is my sister to really putting a lot of a pen to the paper. Mm-hmm. It's my sister who's having family reunions, and she asked me to write a story about the family, to write a story about each of the siblings, and would I do that? So I did a short story for each for one of our family reunions events, mm-hmm. and that went off quite well to be able to tell stories. And so once I did that, I never stopped writing in terms of things about the family. And although I did other writings, I became a member of Norwich Rotary Club. That was maybe 25 years ago. Mm-hmm. And I had a position where every meeting, mm-hmm. someone will have the podium, what they call fellowship, to talk about anything. Mm-hmm. And so I use that to talk about anything, mm-hmm. Whether it's a trip, or whether it's something that have to do with my culture in South Carolina. And so the pieces just kept growing. Mm-hmm.
And then you compiled them together, and then you created this book.
Well, I did compile them together, but I had so many writings, they just kept growing. Mm-hmm. And yes, I compile stories because then I began to write about my grandparents, my great-grandparents, aunts, and a whole lot of other things that was particularly peculiar to South Carolina, and also my experiences in Norwich. So
that's where the theme comes in, deep south, deep north, and what you're actually talking about is the kind of African-American experience in this country in the last 50, 60 years.
Yes, it is a distinction between what my life was like in South Carolina, in the north, south, and then coming, what did I discover when I came? Right. And there are similarities. Mm-hmm. And I talk about coming north, that I was headed for the promised land. Right, right. And then I arrived in Norwich, and I had to say, it's not the promised land. Yeah. There are some similarities between the north and the south.
Right, exactly. It's interesting because I write stories about immigrants. Now, I was born in this country, and my parents were born in this country, but my grandparents came from Eastern Europe. And so I have oral histories, not written anything, but oral histories from one of my grandmothers talking about her discovery about coming to America. So she came to America in 1905 from the Carpathian Mountains of Eastern Europe, Eastern Central Europe. And she had some very interesting stories. And it was kind of remarkable because obviously she was an immigrant, she came of her own free will. And when she arrived, she closed the book on ever going back to Europe. And she lived to be 99 years old. And not for 1 year after she came to this country in 1905 had she ever expressed a desire to go back to Europe. And she never did. She never did. So she sort of like closed one chapter of her life, began a new one, and it had nothing to do with the old chapter, which I think is kind of interesting. But as I speak to other people, when they have spoken to particularly to their grandparents or great-grandparents, there was that similar experience about people who came in the 1860s through probably the 1920s, all those millions and millions of primarily European immigrants who came here, and this was the New Jerusalem, and the other one was just a memory. But your experiences are quite different. So tell us a little bit about what it was like growing up in rural South Carolina in, 50, 60 years ago?
Well, growing up in Ridgeway, where we did, it was agriculture. It was picking cotton and all that. And it was, people worked hard for their money. And then after working hard, you may not have very much. My family we were quite lucky that we were not sharecroppers. My grandfather, he owns his own land, both of my grandparents. And when I get down to it, my great-grandparents. So that was kind of unusual.
Right.
But at the same time, people had little, and had to scratch to make a living. And so then we had that experience in addition to discrimination, segregation that went on. And yet there was that people worked very hard. We had our church that we was very proud of and attended regular. And so that was a time for gathering. And the segregation did affect the lives of individuals because there are things you couldn't do. And the only jobs outside that the men could find was pokewood. There was no work for women. And it was not just there. I mean, if you they didn't have jobs at that time, right in the area that I lived.
Sure.
So it was, that's how you earn your money, by working sharecrops and picking cotton. So, of course, I came to Norwich because I was seeking a better life.
Right.
I was seeking opportunities.
Right.
I heard all about the good things in Connecticut up north.
Right.
That you can eat where you like to eat, that you can go anywhere where you wanted to go, and that you earn money. They was paying good money in the shoe factories. And
yes.
so this was, you were leaving behind all the discrimination, you were leaving behind all of this. And I call it, you was coming to the promised land. Except when you got to the promised land, you found some of the same stuff that you have been living with. And that came as a surprise to me to learn all of this. Disappointing when you decide to look for an apartment and you show up and someone smiles at you and says, oh, I'm so sorry, we just rented it. And then you would get your neighbor, who may be white, well, you go and try that apartment, and you learn that it is indeed available.
Right.
And so those are the things, and also trying to find jobs. I went to school. I went to Norwich Community College, commercial college, and there again, the promised land, you learn to type very well, did shorthand, you did all this, but when you start looking for a job, it was not there. And so those are the kinds of coming to the North, what it was some of the same that you have lived in the South.
It's interesting that you say that because as I mentioned my immigrant grandparents' experience. So my grandmother, my father's mother, who came from these Carpathian Mountains, it was very unusual. They were Jews, and it was very unusual for any Jew to own land in Eastern Europe. And we're talking about the 19th, even into the 20th century. But let me think what this would be. My great-great-grandfather actually did own land, which was remarkable, which meant that we think, because we can't go back and trace it all, that he had lived there or the family had lived there for generations, and then eventually whoever was the political party, the political entity, gave him that land. So there's some commonalities, and my grandfather was well known for being an advocate for letting everybody have a piece of the pie. And my grandfather was born in this country, and he built a house in 1931 in Long Island, what was then nothing but potato fields. And he bought all these potato fields. And then he was also in the political system. He was tried to be involved in politics. And he was considered to be, they didn't call him a communist because he wasn't a communist, but he was called a progressive. And in gratitude for that, the Ku Klux Klan came and burned a cross on my grandparents' front lawn. So they had a reputation, obviously, for not wanting blacks to get anywhere in America. And they had this long-standing anti-Semitism, which my grandmother had left behind, she thought, forever and ever in Europe, but in fact, its ugly head came back. And it's only, I think, within probably for Jews anyway, in the last 30, 40 years, that things have changed remarkably. Now, you don't know whether I'm a Jew or a Catholic or a Buddhist, but I can see that you and I are not of the same color. So I mean, the ability to discriminate is harder for me and easier in terms of people picking on us because it's much more obvious. So it's kind of interesting. And I think that in school we didn't learn enough history, our own history, to really understand really what it was like to be African American in this country. I mean, I think that we still haven't gotten to that place. So I'm very appreciative that you have written this book and tried to really educate us about what it was really like. That the Promised Land, my characters in my novels are all immigrants, and they call this country the New Jerusalem, which is what someone told me Cotton Mather talked about in the 1600s when they came to the United States, the New Jerusalem. But, as my grandmother found out, it had holes in it. It wasn't as pure as it was made out to be. So, tell us a little bit more about what it was like to grow up in South Carolina, because I'm going to be leaving next month to go to South Carolina for a visit to Charleston. But that's a very different world than the world that you grew up in.
When I talk about the farm and making very little money, I mean, that was what happened, and you adjusted to it, and you went to school when you could. We were lucky that my grandfather, both of our grandparents, that they owned their own land, so we didn't have to wait until the sharecropper boss says, hey, the kids must stay out of school until the cotton is picked. But other things that what it was like I remember vividly just getting an ice cream cone, and that you could not stay in the store. You always have to come outside, and then come outside and discover that your ice cream cone is melting and melting so fast that you can
you can't lick it up fast enough.
Right. And the other memorable time is when I was still very young. My cousin was talking to me. He was a grown man. And then, out of nowhere, 2 police officers, they came up and grabbed him, and they beated him, and they dragged him up the street. And I was just beside myself, and I said, Mama, why? Mama, why? He wasn't doing anything. He was just talking to me, Ma. And she said, they have the power. So those words stay with me about when you have power, you can just do whatever it is that you choose to do. And I arrived in Norwich, and I was not happy about what I found here either. Mm-hmm. And what just simple things, or you will go and sit down at a counter. You're supposed to be able to sit freely. But then you discovered that as you sat down, the people would get up, white people would get up and move to another counter, not sitting next to you. So.
And you saw this in Norwich?
Oh yes, I saw all of that in Norwich. But what happened, things were happening. I arrived in 1957.
Okay.
I arrived here. And then there was stuff going on, and someone decided, let's have a branch, an NAACP branch. Mm-hmm. And so that was my beginning of being involved and feeling indeed that I could make a difference in the world.
Right, right.
And so I got involved with NAACP. Mm-hmm. But, and I haven't stopped being involved in my community work.
Because the work is not done.
Right.
The work is not done.
And I wanted to really to share my story. It's the story of the family, just showing us how we had so little and so little opportunities that we did not even think about going to college at that time. Mm-hmm. We didn't have the money. And as time rolled by, things got better. Mm-hmm. My brothers, they all understood the value of education. So they began to send their children off to get higher education, and they did. And we thought that with all of this, they really needed to know their background, their history.
Right.
They need to know what it was like and what their ancestors went through for the future.
Right.
And so we were inspired to tell that story at family reunions. Mm-hmm. And then I felt that it was important to put it in writing for the younger generation so they would have it as evidence of where they've been. Mm-hmm. And my mother was a very strong advocate that people should know their history and that it was important. And so this was my reason for writing the story, telling our story, and honestly what it was like to live back then and what it is now of enjoying some peace and enjoying rewards that our young people have expiring with different positions.
Yes, and I suppose you wrote it as a family story, but it has impact in terms of other people sharing that, listening to that story, whether they be white or black or whatever, to get an understanding. Because I think I mentioned this earlier all the time. I don't think that we teach American history in our schools the way it needs to be taught, about how we started as a country and with slavery. I mean, we were one of the few supposed democracies in the world that actually had that as our foundation, slavery. So I think we, in the school system, have this tendency to pass over this, but this is very much an important piece of American history that is often neglected in terms of its impact. Its impact is right now. It's not something that can simply be washed away. It's not that simple. It's part of the frame of who we are and the country that we've become. So I see your book as much, not necessarily grander, but certainly has a opportunity to give a whole bunch of people who have no idea, whether they be white or black or yellow or brown, whatever, what it was like to be in America and to go through to live through a whole bunch of changes that actually did happen in America.
But the truth is that, yes, we went through a lot of changes in America, and we saw it. And yet, today, we're still going through changes
Absolutely.
in America.
Absolutely.
And it's a time for people to reflect about the past. You know, have we moved forward? Or are we standing still? Those are the questions.
Right, right.
But I start focusing on my family, personal achievements, and that it was not easy, and I would still think that it's not easy for the now generation growing up. And that we need to remember where we came from, the travels, the hardships, and didn't try to achieve above all of that, that you have to climb that ladder. And it's, some call it climbing Jacob's ladder, but being able to move forward. And growing up, I also, at an early age, experienced and had my own ideas about life at an early age as a early young girl. And that I think I have a story here, if I can get it very quickly.
Sure.
Somewhere here that I wrote this, and just how you grow up and how you begin to thinking at an early age, and how I evolved. And I I wrote something after a while about my experience, and it was, I remember wearing, I want to be like my brothers. So you come up, you deal with racism, you also, there's a separation based on your sex.
Yes.
And so I had that experience too. And so after being in Norwich for a while, seeing that happen, women were relegated to certain jobs, men had other jobs,
Right.
and going through all of that. So I was president of the NAACP, and I had served my term, and I was leaving office, and I thought I'll leave them a little gift. And I did. I wrote this, said, I want to be like my brothers. I remember wearing Shirley Temple curls, dresses with many frills. I was a very special little girl. I remember crying when my mother said I could not wear stylish straightened hair. Years later, I cried even harder when I was called a yellow gal. I grew and grew. My ideas were called revolutionary. I wanted to drive a car like my brothers. I wanted to ride a mule without a saddle like my brothers. I wanted to swim naked in the creek like my brothers. I wanted to climb trees, drink moonshine, and cuss just like my brothers. I didn't want to have babies Angela like my mother. I hated cleaning little runny noses and washing muddy red clay faces, removing thorns from little feet and soothing bee-stung little hands. I wanted a career, a job, any job. Well, not quite. No pea picking. Secretary work would have to do. College was out for girls in my family. Who ever heard of going to college to learn how to wash diapers, scrub floors, make beds, and wipe little noses, bake cornbread? It was my reply into having a college education. And yet, here I was in about 1968. This was my situation at a very early age. But when I come to Connecticut,
Right.
there were jobs that women were not to do.
Right.
So I was still on my rebellious side about women's rights, you know, and I was talking about rights for black people. Then I'm saying, what about women?
Right.
And so that moved me on another needle, another space that I wanted to be involved in dismantling all these little barriers to opportunities.
Yes, I mean, I grew up in a time when the first jobs that I actually looked for, there used to be in the help wanted, there was men and women. That was the way the catalog of jobs in the newspaper. And of course, we didn't have the internet or anything like that. So you went to the newspaper, and there were the headings. And clearly, they were differentiating. The only job that women could get with any certainty was the secretarial jobs that you're describing, or teachers, or nurses. That was not doctors, but nurses. Secretaries, not the boss. And some of that had to obviously change. And some of the changes that happened were, of course, political. I mean, people marching and protesting. And then also the opening up, I think, for business, so that women became entrepreneurs. They never, even to this day, get the same backing from banks and private equity firms. But that was the beginning of women having some power in America, because power in America is often related to money in America. And that's the way some of the most successful women in this country have become successful, is because they became entrepreneurs, and the business grew and grew, and it became highly successful. And then private companies then thought maybe women could be in their ranks as well. I mean, the discrimination continues, even though it's in law, it's certainly been outlawed. Well, and I'm sure you've had that same experience.
Well, I work for the Connecticut Commission on Human Rights and Opportunity, so I'm very well of Connecticut laws, dealing with sexual harassment, dealing with discrimination, and just reflecting back, you know, even when there were jobs, you were black, you still did not get the jobs. There was always that little part dealing with discrimination with regard to race. And when I was younger in Norwich, and I moved into what they call low-income housing, where there was about 90% of the people were women single head of household.
Right.
And I had the experience, I ended up taking my son to back us to the hospital emergency room. And I walked in, and the first question was, "Where's your state card?" I'm saying, "What you mean, state card?" "Your state card." And I have an insurance card. What are you asking me about my welfare card? I work. Well, I can't tell that. And my response was, "You should have asked me, not just assume."
Right.
Because I'm black. I'm there with my son. His name is one name, last name, and mine's another. You can't glean anything from that, and should not be asking me. So they thought that I was a little off when I started complaining to the institution about this, how unfair. And he said to me, the president of the hospital said, "We are changing our policy. We are going to always ask."
Right.
When we see you walking in there.
Going to ask for your insurance card, not assume anything else.
Right.
Exactly.
And so people thought that I was a little off. And the other little things that happen is just showing up to cash a check. Someone look at you and say, "Hey, I'm sorry, we only cash our customers' check." And I said, "I am a customer."
One of your customers, right.
And people said, "Well, Lottie, you should have been dressing better." You know, white folks see you not dressed quite so nice, they get another opinion of you. And I says, "I don't care how I'm dressed. If I walk up to the counter, they should be greeted. I should be greeted, and may I help you? Not assuming I'm not your customer."
Right.
So, in my rebellious way, I did write to the bank president, and he says, "Why would she do that? All the people walk in this office a day, bank, and she would pick on you. Oh my goodness." So I says, "I want an apology, and I want it in writing." And I got it.
Right.
I got my letter. And so those are the kinds of little things that happen. And we're talking about the past.
Right.
But and so my whole part was to just demonstrate and show that when I left South Carolina, what I found in Connecticut. And there is still, may not be so blatant so, but there's still room for working and changing.
Absolutely.
And so I'm just simply saying that people of different races, we just need to be more involved in the community. When I say be involved, they should be in more positions. They should be there for his hiring and what have you. So I just, we have
We
a
still have a
society.
ways to go. Absolutely, absolutely. And I think I keep on going back to this, and not because I'm Johnny One Note, but I think it's the fact that kids in school simply don't know American history. They have no idea. I mean, you ask people, they don't even know when the American Civil War might have had. I mean, they could sort of guess. Some of them may know that Lincoln was the President of the United States at the time, and if you lived in the Deep South, you probably know about Lee. I mean, but and Jefferson Davis. But do you really know about the history of this country? Because those things. I mean, we had slavery in this country for 300 years. I mean, it didn't come one day and disappear the next. And so that legacy of that kind of institution remains. And we've always let immigrants in. I mean, we're a country of immigrants. However, that doesn't mean we didn't discriminate against those immigrants when they first came in. It's like everybody needs to have somebody lower on the pecking ladder, right? Somebody's got to be beneath me. And as the immigrants came in, one group after another would blame the other one, and then eventually immigrants are still discriminated if they happen to be looking a little different, like the wearing head scarves or something. So we have a different system of discrimination. But this, your discussion, your battle, is a battle that is part of our American history, and it needs open air. It needs discussion. People need to talk about it, to recognize it, and that's why I think your writing your book although it was made for a personal reason, has larger impact in terms of what people could learn from it.
And what people can learn. But I also feel, they talk about the power of a pen, paper, that I want to not have my nieces and nephews who are living well, doing well, feeling that you're so comfortable that you don't pay attention to the past. You need to know your past. You need to understand, because somewhere along the line, the past can come into the future if you're not vigilant.
Yes.
And my whole thing is, you are living comfortable. Your father and parents have provided and made opportunities so that you can sit at tables that we could never dream of sitting at.
Right.
And my whole purpose is, I want them to understand the legacy of their ancestors, so that they can be prepared and not start sleeping and enjoying the good life, because the good life could end if you're not involved in a process. And that is the political process, that is the economic process of being able to save and what have you. All of those things, that they need those tools. And I believe that I explained part of my growing up and now their grandmothers. And we really have, I call, some wonderful ancestors that we can look up to, who are very strong. And the response has been from these younger people, it's like, Aunt Lottie, we didn't know all that you are telling us. We knew some, but no one explained it in detail as much as you have. You've given us information. You've told us where our ancestors are buried, and who were slaves not. You have just walked down and given us this information, and that we see it as we are cherishing this. And I'm just kind of like really surprised. And when one says, Aunt Lottie, I am buying, those are cousins, I am buying books. This is what I'm going to be giving out for the holidays for my grandchildren and great-grandchildren. I'm like saying, wow, maybe I made a
a difference.
Maybe that,
Absolutely.
having that book out
Sure.
and having them read it and says, we didn't know all this about us.
Right, right.
You know,
right.
they are lawyers, they are doctors, but they said, we didn't know all of this.
And of course, right now, we're living in very volatile political times, where I think that the current political climate is one in where we're slipping backwards, and we really have to fight it, and we have to fight it in a non-violent, political way, social way, of trying to turn back some of the stuff that is currently, happening in our communities. I think that sometimes you can have someone in political power that can be positive and progressive and move us forward, and the reverse can happen. And I think we're living in that period right now in America where the pull is backwards. It's not forwards. We're not thinking progressively. We're not moving forward to end not only discrimination across color lines, but the gender issue. I mean, we're moving in some ways, we're moving backwards, or the threat is that we're moving backwards. So that having books like yours is a wonderful reminder of how one person, someone like you, can make a difference. There is a famous saying in Jewish literature about one person can save the world. And I find in what you've done that sense of you, one person, even if you change the minds of just your relatives, that of and by itself is a great accomplishment.
Thank you.
I think what you've done should have much wider appeal for a whole bunch of people, and whites and blacks, to kind of to get a sense as to, well, we've traveled a long way, but the journey is far from over. I mean, there's just so many more things that need to be done before we are a truly enlightened society. And I think there are currents right now in this country to pull us back, and we have to fight those currents. And I think something like your book is a fabulous reminder about, that was a big journey, but it's certainly not over.
Yes, it's a good reminder and a good talking points about the past, and then looking back at the past and yet putting your light on the future, on what you are going to do. And I just wanted to say that I will be having my book program.
Sure. Yeah. First of all, let's show the book. Here, I have the book. You have the book. Yeah. Let's show the book. Oh, yeah. Can you get a little bit better in there? Yeah. Okay. I got it. Yes. Okay. Deep South, Deep North, A Family's Journey, and it's by Lottie Scott. So this is the book. It's available at Amazon. People can go out and get it. They should go out and get it. And to read it, and particularly because we're living in very crazy times. And this is a reminder, the journey is not over. We have many more miles to go. So I urge my listeners, my viewers, to take a look at this book and pass it on to other people. This is a great history lesson. It's a personal history lesson, but it has far greater implications for the rest of us. So I think that's wonderful. Do you have a date for a book reading or something that you want to share with us?
Yes, it's going to be Sunday, the 29th at 2:30 at Donald Oak Theater.
Okay, good.
At 62 Broadway.
In Norwich.
In Norwich.
Right.
2:30.
The Donald Oak Theater is right there in downtown Norwich.
Yes.
Parking is a pain, but other than that, it's a lovely little theater. I've been there myself.
Yes.
So tell us again. So this Sunday.
Yes, the 29th.
The 29th of July, 2 p.m.
2:30.
2:30 p.m., 62 Broadway.
Yes.
And to go to that wonderful place. It's a nice, lovely place to go to. And you're going to give a talk on your book.
Yes, I will be doing that.
And are there other venues that you're going to be at or do you have it on your website so people
Yes, it's on my website.
Okay, so people can just go to that website, take a look, and see what other dates she has available. And again, go out and buy the book. It's on Amazon. It's July, Christmas in July. Go ahead and buy something for your friends, for your family. It's a kind of an eye-opening kind of thing to read. Again, remembering that we sort of passed over a lot of history that we don't teach our kids anymore. So this is an opportunity to teach your children well about what happened in this country. It's a great country, but we had a pretty jagged history in the past. And again, the journey is not over. We are still climbing. We're still climbing. So that's great. So more spots. You have a bunch of different venues that you're going to be speaking at?
I don't think of... I don't think I have another one. I do. I can't remember where it is, but anyway.
It's all right. Just go to the website. When
yes,
you get to
website.
A certain age, past to age 25, your memory sort of goes with you, and so it's just a matter of just getting to the website, taking a look, and go to Amazon, go buy the book. It's it's not going to break your bank. So, do you want to read something more from your book? I think
Yes,
I think the people might enjoy that. So you get a little flavor as to, what can you
Okay.
expect?
What can you expect?
Right.
I'll take you back down to Mama's Lane.
Okay.
And of course, I walked up without my glasses, so that's par for the cause.
Would you like me to read it?
Well,
I'm just suggesting.
you're just a suggestion, but I'm not sure where I want to go.
All right. I leave it to you.
I really was going to start off that before my birth.
Oh,
before
okay.
my
All right.
birth.
What life was
And-
like before.
Yes, somewhat like that. My mother and father got married, and they moved into my great-grandfather's house, great-uncle house, and so my mother had to stay home while Dad goes off to work with his father, which was about a mile away. So she met my Aunt Laura, and during our discussion, she learned about hants from Aunt Laura, because Mom was saying that she really was sitting down and she was listening to this organ and wonder why is this organ playing in a house that is empty and that the occupants have been dead for a while.
Oh, okay.
And so Aunt Laura explained that it was hants that she was seeing and counting. And Mama was also concerned because from time to time a milk churn is turned over, or she finding something else out of place, and all these little things were happening. And so Aunt Laura convinced Mama that the hats, you can't see them, and you just find yourself walking right through them. And Mama got scared, and so she decided that she'd take Dr. Miles Nerving. And so on her journey of trying to be peaceful in her own house, she decided that she would take Miles Nerving. And so on the night that it was time for my birth, that she began to dread, because the hands are always moving around. And so my dad had to go and get the midwife and left Mama alone. And so during his drive and back to get back home, there Mom was taking every half an hour, every hour, she was just taking mild nervings. And she would get up and there would be milk, there would be everything's going on, all this noise, and she went absolutely wild. And she continued and she prayed, and it took maybe an hour or more before Dad could get back.
Right.
And so she took so many mild nerving, so she really went off and slept. And I tell the story of what it was like to be in Mama's womb while she was going through all of this. And I'm
turmoil,
feeling all
yes.
of this, what's going on, what's happening to me. So Mom got through that birth. And so did I.
Yes, obviously.
And there we were. And that was that very proud moment that my mother would tell. It was just like the best thing could have happened. And so I tell some stories about my life. that I find interest in myself.
Right, right. Well, it's a picture of a life that many people did not have, but there are certain people that did, and it's not only black people, but people all over who had this kind of, this is a rural, agricultural kind of experience.
And, and a couple other things which, because of my sight, I'm not going to read, but I like to always tell the story of childbirth for me. That was childbirth for my mother, my being born. But then I was a young mother I was pregnant and I'm about to have a child. Meanwhile, I went back in flashing and says, my best friend, who's 15 years old, my best friend who married my uncle, she was pregnant and became ill during the delivery, and she died.
Yes,
and it left such an impact. We were the same age that a 15-year-old died from childbirth. And so I got married, and then I wanted to go to the hospital. Well, no one goes to the hospital. Everybody have a midwife. And I said, I don't want a midwife. I want to have my baby in a hospital. Well, my husband thought I had lost my mind. And no, you're going to have that baby at home like the rest of the women. And so I cried, and my mother said, it's not going to happen. So she called my dad and says, our child is going to go to the hospital, have her baby. And that's what happened.
Right.
And so that was, at that time, I guess you can say that I always had this being able to protest, speak up, and maybe not being silent. And I don't think I'm silent now, and I still, when I get a chance to, and people rile me up, I speak up.
Right, you don't take everything for granted.
Yes.
And you fight your way through it. And well, we need some more fighters. We need dozens and dozens of people just like you. And there's a lot of other issues out there. That's exactly right. People should not be complacent. They should not be indifferent. They should try very hard to be part of the process, the civil society. I think there is this interest, I think, in the last maybe year among our population, particularly some of our younger people, who want to get involved in the political process. They don't see what they look around, they don't like what they see, and they think they can make a difference. And they can. They can. Everybody should make it their business to register to vote and get out and vote this year. It's very, very important. And because some of the margins in congressional districts and even Senate races have been so small of late, it's because people sat home.
And I wanted to, if we have 1 minute,
yes,
on Friday, tomorrow, that the Norwich is going to be opening the Ellis Ruley Project Park.
Okay.
And that's and that's something that I've been working on with others, and it's very significant for the city.
Okay.
It's significant that this wonderful artist, Ellis Ruley, painted, and his work is well known, but at the time it was not. And I came in 1957, and he was dead in 1959. So it is just all with this book that I'm launching, and having this park concluded, and we have the ceremony tomorrow.
Okay.
It's just like, wow.
Right.
It's so
Two
wonderful.
Milestones in a week. Two milestones. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, that's wonderful, and that's that's part of what historians and people involved in writing history are now opening up the fact that there's a lot of women, there's a lot of people of color, there's a lot of Native Americans who have contributed, particularly artists, whether it be through writing or poetry or visual arts, have been neglected. And there is lots of universities now who are paying special attention to all of these hidden artists, and many of them have been neglected because they weren't white men. And so there is that kind of push, and we have to continue to prod academic institutions and museums and cultural institutions to remember that there are a lot of other very talented people that have been neglected because they weren't white men. And obviously you have been involved in this in a very real way by launching a park where people can have a lot of fun and get out into the sunshine, and dedicated to a particular artist. So that's great. I mean, that's part of who you are. You're always involved. You're always pushing the envelope, which is good because we need in society. We need more people to push the envelope, without going out and fighting with guns and knives, but just pushing the envelope with your vocal
voice.
Right, your vocal protests, letter writing. We forgot how to write letters. I mean, when we are unhappy, we should be writing to our senators and our Congress people, telling them what we think, how we want to have our money spent. We actually pay their salaries, so, right, they have an obligation to at least listen to what we have to say. So it's people like you that make a difference, absolutely. Have you ever been a politician? Have you been elected to office?
No.
Is this something you want?
No, not at this age.
What's the difference?
I just want to relax and enjoy the rest. I'm not going to go out and look for any position. Mm-hmm. Now, if there's some young people who want to be inspired and listen to me,
right, I
would do that. But no.
No politics for you. No. But are you going to be active in getting people to get out and vote this year? Because I mean, there's an important election in November.
It is important, but if I do something, I will be talking to young people.
Oh yes.
You go. I'm not going to be walking the streets or doing anything.
Right.
But if you want to hear it, we will talk. We will gather with my little partners around. We will gather and say, young people, okay, yes, we're going to do something like that.
Okay, that's great. Now there is an organization, Jewish Federation of Eastern Connecticut, that has a couple of very interesting programs. So what they have done, they call it, first it was Encountering Survivors. And in that program, which has been around for several years, students from the New London area, many of them high school students in the suburban and rural districts, go into the homes of Holocaust survivors and hear from their lips or their children's lips, if they passed, about what it was like to go through the Holocaust. And out of that idea of encountering survivors has come this year a different program, which is Encountering Differences. And it's taken that model to get, again, white students in suburban and rural areas to come into the homes of African Americans in New London and find out directly from them in a personal way, a personal journey, what it is like to be African American in this northern state. And that is an eye-opener. Your book is one form, probably a wider kind of form. But this is a program which I helped to get some grant money for, to push on, and it's, we have a basic model from the Holocaust survivors idea, and now we've expanded it into something also that when young people get this opportunity to hear firsthand about other people's experiences they did not have anything to do with, might not have known anything about. This just sitting in somebody's home and having this personal small group interaction opens eyes, opens hearts, opens the mind to all kinds of possibilities. And we need more things like that, more programs like that. I think it's kind of an addition, and the prime audience is young high school students. When they're forming ideas, getting a sense of who they are and who their community is and who their country is, it's this opportunity to mold minds into being much more open-minded, and to see a world and understand a world that they're not living and never will live. So it's a wonderful program, and it's very much in keeping with what you are attempting to do as well. And so there are some programs out there, and if there are some groups out there that are involved with programs that fit kind of Lottie's and this Encountering Differences program, let people know. They can contact me at graysonharriet@gmail.com and let me know about these kinds of programs, and perhaps they would like to come on the TV show and we can have a kind of open discussion about what it's like to get people to think differently, to open up people's minds, that they shouldn't be so narrow-minded. They shouldn't be sitting in their bunkers. They should be part of a bigger game. And so if you know of any of these programs, contact me here and we can talk about it and maybe have some more programs in here in the studio. So yeah, there's more opportunity. Is there something else that you want to tell us or read to us from this wonderful book? How do you conclude the book? I mean, the journey's not over. So how do we get people to join you in furthering that journey to someplace else?
How I concluded the book. I concluded the book, and I'll just read this if I can. Do I say?
Well, you can summarize it. You don't have to actually have to read it to me.
At age 81, I look back, not in anger, but in gratitude. My experiences helped shape who I am today. It helped me to survive and to teach others how to overcome challenging circumstances. Today, our children and their children are achieving in ways that once was thought impossible. Our mother was always inspiring us to work for what we want. Mama learned from her daddy that you held your head high and you did the best job possible you could do, even if it was carrying a slop jar. There was no shame in doing a good job. It was a matter of pride to your work and pride. Mama said to always put God first and the devil behind you, and you were triumphant over evil. Mama always stayed firm on her faith in God. She never shouted in church or got down on her knees to pray. Mama said that she did not have to because God knows my heart. She was going to church and equally loved going to what I would end the juke joints.
So we're going to start to conclude. But anyway, I want people to get this book, Deep South, Deep North, A Family's Journey, Lottie Scott, and then go on her website and take a look and see what she has to offer. Lottie, I want to thank you for being on my show.
You're welcome.
It was a pleasure, absolute pleasure. Get out there and get her book. And let me tell you a few things that are happening in the neighborhood. So I want to thank everybody who came to our art show in June. The paintings are still on the wall. So if you want to, you contact SEC TV Studio. Come on in here. You can still come and take a look at all those paintings. You can buy those paintings. Remember, we are a nonprofit organization. We need your dollars as much as anybody else. So if you want to enhance and to push and promote local artists in our community, come by the studio and take a look at those artists. We'll have another show in the winter. But in the meantime, come on down to the studio. You can make an appointment. You can come on in. Any of our Franks would be happy to show you around and show you some of our artists. And I'm out there promoting the authors of our local community in these literary salons. I have actually 3 going on. So we have Books and Brews, which is in Westerly, Rhode Island, and hosted by the Malted Barley, a wonderful institution in downtown Westerly. You can sip beer, have a wonderful pretzel, and hear young artists. Some older people have written wonderful, wonderful books. That's the 4th Tuesday of every month. So next month, in August, come on down, 4th Tuesday, lots of great authors. We also then have Literary Salon, Wine and Words, hosted by the Tapped Apple, which is actually makes hard cider and apple wine. That's the 3rd Wednesday of the month. So August, it's going to be August 15th. I'm going to launch my new book. My new book is The Terrorist. So all about how our hero, our anti-hero, Sasha Perloff, New York City police detective, Russian-born, goes back to the old Soviet Union to interrogate a terrorist, and how he gets to that journey. And along the way, he goes and meets some of his old relatives in other parts of Eastern Europe. So it's a wonderful tale of his story and of the problems that we have in this country, potentially with terrorists being smuggled in with people who smuggle in humans. So go ahead and take a look. Thank you very much. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on. I thank you for listening. This is Harriet Grayson, your host and producer of Community Culture Showcase.